I'm Amber Reynolds, 27 years old, and 3 months ago my life changed forever at First National Bank. That sunny Tuesday morning I sat in the marble lobby, my father Richard hovering beside me, his presence suffocating as always. In my pocket was a hastily folded note, my last desperate attempt to protect the inheritance my mother left me. My palms were sweating as I watched the minutes tick by, knowing that once we entered those conference rooms my father would try to make me sign everything away. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to find out how a bank manager's keen eye saved my financial future and helped me discover the strength my mother always knew I had. My mother, Rebecca Reynolds, was my best friend. She was the kind of woman who lit up every room she entered, creative, passionate, and fiercely independent. We would spend weekends visiting art galleries or trying out new recipes together, laughing until our sides hurt. She taught art at the local community college, just like I do now, following in her footsteps. When she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer last year, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The 6 months of her illness were brutal. I moved back into my childhood home to help care for her, watching helplessly as she withered away. My father, Richard, handled the practical aspects, managing her medications, speaking with doctors, and overseeing all financial matters. That was always his domain. As a successful investment banker, he controlled our family's money with an iron grip. My mother never questioned him about finances, at least not openly. But during those final weeks, something changed. When my father wasn't around, Mom would squeeze my hand and whisper cryptic messages. "I've made sure you'll be taken care of, Amber," she told me one afternoon while we flipped through old photo albums. "There are papers in the blue box in my closet. If anything happens, go to Sarah Jensen at First National. She's been my banker for years." I didn't understand the urgency in her voice then. I was too consumed by grief, by the impending loss that loomed over us. When she passed away in her sleep one Tuesday morning, the world seemed to lose its color. I was devastated, barely functional during the funeral arrangements and the weeks that followed. My father changed after her death. He had always been controlling, but now his scrutiny intensified. He questioned every purchase I made, insisted I move back to the family home to save money, and began monitoring my spending in ways that made me uncomfortable. When I mentioned looking for my mother's blue box, he dismissed it, saying he had already handled all her personal effects. "Your mother wasn't thinking clearly at the end," he said over dinner one night 3 weeks after the funeral. "All this talk about special provisions and separate accounts, it was the medication talking. Everything is joint property anyway." I wanted to believe him. It was easier than confronting the possibility that my father wasn't being honest, but small things kept nagging at me. Mom's jewelry collection had mysteriously been donated to charity according to my father. Her personal laptop had crashed beyond repair. And whenever I brought up her final wishes, he would redirect the conversation. Then came the financial pressure. Dad started suggesting I should sell my small apartment since the market is good right now. He offered to help manage the modest teacher's pension my mother had left me, and he kept delaying discussions about any inheritance. "These things take time, Amber," he would say. "Legal matters move slowly." The breaking point came about 3 months after Mom's death. I was in my father's home office looking for a stapler when I noticed a folder labeled RR Estate partially hidden under some magazines. I shouldn't have looked, but something in me needed to know. Inside were drafts of documents with terms like power of attorney and asset consolidation. There were bank statements showing joint accounts I never knew existed being drained over the past 2 months, and most disturbingly, there was a handwritten list of figures next to names I didn't recognize, except they all ended with the letters BT, which I knew from overhearing my father's phone call stood for betting track. My father had a gambling problem. My mother had known and had taken steps to protect at least some of her assets from his control, and now he was systematically dismantling those protections. 2 days later he announced we needed to go to the bank together to handle some inheritance paperwork. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "First National?" I asked, remembering my mother's words. He looked surprised for a moment. "Yes, that's where your mother did her banking. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Wear something professional." That night I couldn't sleep. My mother's last words echoed in my mind, "Don't let your father handle your future." I tossed and turned, wrestling with my conscience. Was I being paranoid? Was I misreading the situation? But deep down I knew my father was planning something that would give him control over whatever my mother had left me. At 3 a.m. I got up and wrote a note on a small index card. "My name is Amber Reynolds. My mother was Rebecca Reynolds. I believe my father is forcing me to sign away my inheritance. Please help. Call me privately at 550 FIVMAS 189. I folded it small and tucked it into my wallet, not knowing if I would have the courage to use it, but needing the safety net it provided. The truth was I was afraid of my father. Not physically, he had never been violent, but he wielded disapproval and financial manipulation like weapons. He had controlled my mother through money for decades, and I had watched her surrender her independence bit by bit. I couldn't let that happen to me, not when my mother had clearly tried to prevent it. Tuesday morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. I dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer with the note tucked securely in the inside pocket. When I checked my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the pale, anxious woman staring back at me. I practiced what I would say if questioned about the documents, how I would ask to read everything thoroughly before signing. My hands trembled as I applied minimal makeup, trying to look composed and professional. Downstairs, my father was already at the breakfast table, newspaper spread out beside his coffee. He looked up as I entered, his eyes quickly assessing my appearance. "Good, you look presentable," he said with a nod of approval. "Remember, this is just routine paperwork. The banker might ask you some verification questions. Just confirm that you're Rebecca's daughter and that you authorize me to handle the estate matters." I poured myself coffee, needing the caffeine to steady my nerves. "What exactly will I be signing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. My father folded his newspaper precisely, a sign I recognized as mild irritation. "Just standard inheritance documents, transfer of assets, account consolidations, nothing complicated." "I'd like to read everything before I sign," I said, stirring my coffee longer than necessary to avoid his gaze. "Of course," he replied smoothly, "though it's all legal jargon. I've already had our family attorney review everything. No need to waste time at the bank puzzling through it all." The implication was clear. Questioning the documents would be both unnecessary and inconvenient. Classic Richard Reynolds manipulation. "Still, I'd like to understand what I'm signing," I insisted, feeling a small surge of courage. My father's smile tightened. "Your mother never bothered with all these details. She trusted me to handle things." The unspoken message hung in the air. "Why can't you be more like her?" "Mom was an artist, not a businesswoman," I countered, immediately regretting the defiance in my tone. "And you're an art teacher," he replied, his voice deceptively gentle. "Financial management isn't your strong suit, Amber. Remember that credit card disaster in college, or the lease you almost signed for that overpriced studio?" The references to my past financial mistakes stung as intended. My father had always kept a mental catalog of my errors, ready to deploy them whenever I showed signs of independence. "That was years ago," I said quietly. "I've learned a lot since then." "Of course you have," he said with a patronizing smile, "and I'm proud of you. But these matters are complex. That's why I'm here to help. You focus on your teaching and your art. Let me handle the money." It was the same dynamic I'd watched all my life. My father positioning himself as the protective financial guardian while subtly undermining confidence in his creative wife and daughter's ability to manage money. Only now, without my mother as a buffer, his control felt even more suffocating. The drive to the bank was tense. My father filled the silence with instructions disguised as casual conversation. "If they ask about your mother's accounts, just refer them to me. Don't mention anything about separate arrangements your mother might have discussed." She was confused toward the end. "If you get overwhelmed, just excuse yourself and I'll handle it." Each statement increased my anxiety and reinforced my suspicion that something wasn't right. When we stopped at a red light, I pulled out my phone and quickly texted my friend Madison at bank with Dad. "Something feels wrong about inheritance paperwork. Call me in an hour to check in." I thought I'd been discreet, but my father's peripheral vision had always been exceptional. "Who are you texting?" he asked sharply. "Just Madison," I replied, trying to sound casual. "She wanted to meet for coffee later." He held out his hand, palm up. "Let me see." 27 years old, and I still found myself automatically handing over my phone at his command. He read the message, his face darkening. "What exactly feels wrong, Amber?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. I'm nervous about signing legal documents I don't understand," I stammered. I see. He pocketed my phone instead of returning it. "No distractions during the meeting. You'll get this back afterward." My last lifeline to the outside world disappeared into my father's suit jacket. I felt like a teenager again, powerless and controlled. The note in my pocket suddenly seemed even more crucial. We arrived at First National Bank 15 minutes early. The imposing stone building had always intimidated me, but today it represented a strange mix of threat and potential salvation. As we walked through the revolving doors into the marble-floored lobby, My father transformed into his public persona, charming, confident, authoritative. "Richard Reynolds to see Mr. Harrison," he announced to the receptionist, flashing the smile that had won over countless business associates. "We have a 10 a.m. appointment regarding my late wife's estate." The receptionist smiled back warmly. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please have a seat, and he'll be with you shortly." I noticed how my father had introduced only himself, making me an unnamed accessory to his business. It was a subtle power move, one of many in his arsenal. As we sat in the plush waiting area chairs, I observed how the bank staff greeted him with familiarity. He chatted easily with a passing loan officer, mentioned a golf game with someone named Phillips from the investment department. But beneath his confident exterior, I caught signs of tension. The way he repeatedly checked his watch, how his right foot tapped silently against the carpet, the slight dampness at his temples despite the bank's cool air conditioning. My father was nervous. And that made me even more certain that whatever was about to happen wasn't routine paperwork. "Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Reynolds, I'm Thomas Harrison, the state manager here at First National." A tall man in his 50s approached us with an outstretched hand. He had the polished appearance of someone who had spent decades in banking, from his precisely knotted tie to his well-shined shoes. My father stood immediately, shaking his hand with that perfect blend of firmness and warmth he had mastered. "Tom, good to see you again. This is my daughter Amber." I shook Mr. Harrison's hand, noting how my father had claimed prior acquaintance, though this was supposedly our first meeting about my mother's estate. "Pleased to meet you, Ms. Reynolds. I'm very sorry about your mother's passing," Mr. Harrison said, his practiced sympathy sounding genuine enough. "If you'll follow me, we've prepared the Maple conference room for our meeting." We followed him through the bank's main floor, past tellers and loan officers, through a security door that required his badge and into a hallway lined with conference rooms. The Maple room was intimidating in its formality, a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, water carafes and glasses at regular intervals, and a large screen on one wall presumably for presentations. "Please make yourselves comfortable," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to the chairs. "Ms. Winters from our legal department will be joining us shortly, along with Mrs. Jensen, your mother's personal banker." At the mention of Sarah Jensen, I felt a small surge of hope. My mother had specifically mentioned her name. Perhaps she really had made arrangements I didn't know about. My father's reaction was less enthusiastic. "Is all that necessary? I was under the impression this would be a straightforward signing." "Just standard procedure for estate transitions of this size, Mr. Reynolds," Harrison replied smoothly. "We want to ensure everything is properly handled." Before my father could respond, a younger woman entered carrying a leather portfolio. "Good morning, I'm Vanessa Winters, legal counsel for First National." She distributed folders to each of us. "These contain the initial documents we'll be reviewing today." I opened my folder and found several dense pages of legal terminology. Terms like fiduciary responsibility and asset consolidation jumped out at me. My father leaned closer, pointing to specific sections as if helping me navigate the complexity, but his guidance felt more like steering. "As you can see here, Amber," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "this simply confirms your identity as Rebecca's daughter and primary heir, and this section acknowledges my role as executor of her estate." I read more carefully than he expected. The document actually stated I was acknowledging him as having full and irrevocable power of attorney for all financial matters related to the estate of Rebecca Reynolds. That went far beyond executor duties. "This seems to give you complete control over Mom's assets," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "It's standard legal language," my father dismissed. "It just means I can handle the paperwork without dragging you to the bank for every little decision." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Actually, power of attorney is quite comprehensive. It would give Mr. Reynolds legal authority to make all financial decisions regarding your inheritance, Ms. Reynolds." My father shot Harrison an irritated glance before composing his features, which is precisely what Rebecca wanted. She never burdened Amber with financial matters. "I'd like to read through everything carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My father sighed dramatically. "Of course, though, as I mentioned, it's mostly legal terminology. Perhaps we could have Mr. Harrison summarize the key points to save time." Before Harrison could respond, the conference room door opened again. A woman in her mid-50s entered, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, her navy suit impeccably tailored. She carried an iPad and had reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "I apologize for the delay," she said, taking a seat directly across from me. I'm Sarah Jensen, Senior Account Manager. I worked with Rebecca for nearly 15 years. There was something in her direct gaze that gave me courage. This was the woman my mother had told me to seek out. Mrs. Jensen, my father acknowledged with a tight smile. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today. I personally handle all transitions for long-term Premier clients, she replied, her tone professional but cool. Rebecca was not just a client but someone I considered a friend. The meeting proceeded with review of the initial documents. Mrs. Jensen asked several verification questions: my mother's date of birth, her social security number, her home address. I answered each one, while my father grew increasingly impatient. Perhaps we could move things along, he suggested after about 20 minutes. Ember has classes to teach this afternoon. Actually, I took the whole day off, I corrected him, earning another irritated glance. Mrs. Jensen looked up from her iPad. Ms. Reynolds, do you have any questions about what you've reviewed so far? Several clauses had caught my attention, particularly those referring to consolidation of existing accounts and termination of prior financial arrangements, but my father's presence made me hesitant to voice my concerns. I'm still trying to understand some of the terminology, I admitted. Perhaps you'd like a moment to review privately, Mrs. Jensen suggested, her eyes holding mine with significance I couldn't miss. That won't be necessary, my father interjected. I can explain anything she's confused about. Mrs. Jensen's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes told me she understood more than she was saying. Of course, let's proceed to the next section then. I realized I needed to get her attention somehow. As we moved to the next document, I deliberately dropped my pen. It clattered to the floor and rolled toward Mrs. Jensen's side of the table. I'll get that, I said quickly, bending down. As I reached for the pen, I pulled a folded note from my pocket and placed it directly by her shoe, making brief but deliberate eye contact as I straightened up. Mrs. Jensen's professionalism never faltered, but I saw her foot slightly move to cover the note. My heart pounded as I returned to my seat, wondering if I had just made a terrible mistake or possibly saved myself from financial disaster. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes before Mrs. Jensen excused herself. I need to retrieve some additional documentation from our secure system. Please continue with the overview. I'll return shortly. As she left, I felt both relief that she had taken my note and anxiety about what would happen next. My father used her absence to increase pressure. Ember, you're overthinking this, he said in a low voice while Mr. Harrison was reviewing something with Ms. Winters. Your mother wanted me to handle these matters. You know how she always trusted my financial judgment. I thought of the drained accounts I'd seen documented in his office, the gambling debts, my mother's secret warnings. I just want to understand what I'm signing, I insisted. This is embarrassing, he hissed, leaning closer. You're making it seem like there's something suspicious happening. These are busy professionals. His intimidation tactics were familiar, making me feel I was creating a scene, being unreasonable, embarrassing both of us. It had worked countless times before, but something had changed in me since finding those documents in his office. I'm not signing anything I don't understand, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. My father's expression darkened, and he switched tactics. You realize I'm still the co-signer on your apartment lease, and that car you drive is in my name. You might want to consider how difficult certain aspects of your life could become. The threat was unmistakable, and it struck at my deepest insecurities. Without his support, could I maintain my independence? I'd always been told by him that my teacher's salary wasn't enough to live comfortably in the city. Was that true or just another control tactic? Before I could respond, the door opened again. Mrs. Jensen returned, but she wasn't alone. An older man in a security uniform accompanied her, along with another man in a suit whom I didn't recognize. Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Jensen said, her voice professional but firm, could you step outside with Mr. Blackwell for a moment? He needs to verify some information about the accounts. My father looked between them, suspicion crossing his features. Can't we do that here? We're in the middle of important paperwork. It concerns some private banking matters that might be best discussed separately, Mrs. Jensen insisted. After a moment of tense silence, my father stood. Fine, Amber, don't sign anything until I return. The irony of his instruction wasn't lost on me. As the door closed behind him, Mrs. Jensen turned to me, her professional mask softening slightly. Ms. Reynolds, I received your note. Are you in any danger? Not physically, I said quickly, but I believe my father is trying to take control of whatever my mother left me. She warned me before she died to be careful, to find you specifically. Mrs. Jensen nodded. Rebecca spoke to me several times about her concerns. That's why I needed to be here today. I'm very glad you reached out. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was truly on my side. The relief was so overwhelming that tears threatened, but I blinked them back. This wasn't the time to fall apart. Mrs. Jensen placed her iPad on the table, angling it so I could see the screen. Your mother made very specific arrangements during the last year of her life. She created several accounts and investments in your name that your father has no access to. She swiped through several screens showing account statements and legal documents. This trust was established 6 months ago, with you as the sole beneficiary, and here's the deed to your mother's studio property, transferred to your name last year. I stared at the evidence of my mother's careful planning, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. She had known, she had tried to protect me even while battling cancer. The documents your father brought today are not the ones we prepared, Mrs. Jensen continued, her voice low but intense. They appear to be designed to nullify your mother's arrangements and place everything under his control. How is that possible? I asked, stunned by the revelation. The power of attorney document you were about to sign would have given him legal authority to override many of your mother's carefully constructed protections, she explained, and the second document, she pointed to one I hadn't yet reviewed, would have transferred all assets to a single account he controls. Ms. Winters, the legal counsel, leaned forward. Ms. Reynolds, we have reason to believe your father may have already accessed some accounts improperly. Has he asked you to sign anything else since your mother's passing? I thought back to the various papers he'd pushed across the kitchen table, just routine insurance forms and beneficiary confirmations that I had signed without much scrutiny in the fog of grief following my mother's death. Yes, I admitted, several things. He said they were standard paperwork for her life insurance and pension. Mrs. Jensen and Ms. Winters exchanged concerned glances. We've also discovered some irregular transactions from your mother's personal accounts in the past 3 months, Mrs. Jensen said carefully, large withdrawals to entities that appear to be connected to gambling establishments. The revelation shouldn't have shocked me after what I'd found in my father's office, but hearing it confirmed by banking professionals made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My father, the man who had lectured me about financial responsibility my entire life, had been stealing my inheritance to cover gambling debts. Before we could discuss further, raised voices became audible from the hallway. My father's distinctive baritone grew louder, clearly arguing with someone. The conference room door burst open and he stormed in, followed by the security officer and Mr. Blackwell. This meeting is over, my father announced, his face flushed with anger. Amber, we're leaving. These people are overstepping their authority. Mrs. Jensen stood, perfectly composed despite my father's obvious rage. Mr. Reynolds, we've uncovered some concerning irregularities in the estate management process. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest to address them now. There are no irregularities, my father snapped. I'm the executor of my wife's estate and Amber's father. I'm looking out for her best interests, which clearly no one else here is concerned with. Dad, I said, finding my voice despite my racing heart. What's going on? Mrs. Jensen says there are accounts Mom set up for me that you didn't mention. He turned to me, his expression shifting to one of wounded betrayal. You passed a note to them, behind my back, after everything I've done for you? The manipulation was so transparent now that I could see it clearly. The guilt trip, the reminder of all I supposedly owed him, the positioning of himself as the victim when he was the one attempting fraud. Why didn't you tell me about Mom's trust? I asked, refusing to be diverted. Your mother wasn't thinking clearly, he insisted. The same explanation he'd given for months. She made some impulsive decisions during her illness that weren't financially sound. I've been trying to correct them for your benefit. By emptying her accounts, I challenged, newfound courage flowing through me, by forging documents to gain control of everything she left me. His face hardened as he realized I knew more than he'd suspected. You don't understand the complexities of our financial situation. There are debts, obligations. Gambling debts, I said quietly. The room fell silent. My father's expression cycled through shock, denial, and finally cold anger. Mr. Blackwell, Mrs. Jensen said calmly to the man who had entered with my father, as the bank's security director, I believe we have a situation that requires your attention. Indeed, Mr. Blackwell replied. Mr. Reynolds, based on the evidence Mrs. Jensen has shared with me, there appears to be substantial reason to believe you've engaged in attempts to defraud both this bank and your daughter. I must ask you to remain here while we contact the proper authorities. My father's demeanor changed instantly, desperation replacing anger. Amber, you can't let them do this. I'm your father. Everything I've done has been for this family. For a moment I faltered. Despite everything, this was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had attended every school play, who had seemed so strong and infallible throughout my childhood. But then I remembered my mother's words, her efforts to protect me even as she was dying. And I found my resolve. No, Dad, what you've done was for yourself. Mom tried to protect me because she knew what you might do. You ungrateful, he began, taking a step toward me. The security officer moved swiftly between us. Sir, I need you to step back and calm down. My father looked around the room, seeming to realize his position was untenable. His shoulders sagged slightly, but his eyes remained calculating. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. I'm sure you'll have ample opportunity to do so, Mrs. Jensen said coolly. For now, Ms. Reynolds and I need to discuss her mother's actual wishes regarding her inheritance, without your interference. You can't keep me from my daughter, he protested. No, but we can prevent you from committing fraud in our bank, Mr. Blackwell stated firmly. Then given the evidence of your previous attempts to misappropriate funds, we can certainly restrict your access to any accounts related to your late wife's estate. My father's gaze locked with mine, a silent plea for loyalty battling with the fury of exposure. In that moment, I saw him clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the infallible financial genius he'd always portrayed himself to be, but as a desperate man who had gambled away not just money but the trust of his family. Mr. Reynolds, please come with me, the security officer said, gesturing to the door. We need to take your statement regarding these transactions. As they escorted my father from the room, his final words to me were not an apology but a warning. You have no idea what you're doing, Amber. You can't manage this on your own. You'll come crawling back. The door closed behind them, and I sat in stunned silence, the full weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. My hands trembled as I reached for the water glass in front of me. Take a deep breath, Ms. Reynolds, Mrs. Jensen said gently. You've shown remarkable courage today. But I didn't feel courageous. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly alone. My mother was gone, and now I'd effectively lost my father too, though the truth was I'd never really had the father I thought I did. Once my father had been escorted to another part of the building, Mrs. Jensen closed the conference room door and returned to her seat across from me. The other bank officials had discreetly withdrawn, leaving just the two of us. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Mrs. Jensen said, her professional demeanor softening. She came to me about 14 months ago, shortly after her diagnosis. She was concerned about protecting your financial future. She never told me she was worried about Dad taking my inheritance, I said, still processing the morning's revelation. Rebecca didn't want to burden you with her concerns during her illness, Mrs. Jensen explained, but she had witnessed your father's gambling problems escalate over the years. She was particularly worried about what might happen after she was gone. How bad is it? I asked, needing to understand the full scope of the situation. Mrs. Jensen sighed. Based on what we've uncovered, your father has accumulated substantial gambling debts over the past 5 years. Your mother had been quietly covering them from her personal savings to maintain family stability, but when her diagnosis came, she realized she needed to create financial firewalls to protect your inheritance. She turned her iPad toward me again, this time showing a different set of documents. Your mother established this trust with the proceeds from her family inheritance and her life insurance policy. She named me as the trustee until you turned 30, with provisions that you would have graduated access beginning immediately after her passing. I stared at the figures on the screen, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The amount was substantial, not a fortune, but enough to provide security and options I hadn't realized I had. There's more, Mrs. Jensen continued, swiping to another document. This is the deed to your childhood home. Your mother transferred it to a separate trust in your name last year. Your father was apparently unaware of this, as the property had originally been purchased with her family money before their marriage. The implications were staggering. You mean, the house is mine, not his? Legally, yes. The transfer was completed and recorded 6 months ago. Your father has been living there without legal ownership. I thought of how confidently he had threatened to cut me off, to make my life difficult, never realizing that he was the one standing on shaky ground. There's something else your mother wanted you to have, Mrs. Jensen said, reaching into her portfolio. She withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's distinctive handwriting. She asked me to give you this when the time came. With trembling fingers, I accepted the envelope. It felt surreal to see my mother's handwriting months after her death, a message from beyond that she had entrusted to this woman. What will happen to my father? I asked, not yet ready to open the letter. That largely depends on whether you wish to press charges, Mrs. Jensen explained. The evidence suggests he has committed attempted fraud, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds. At minimum, the bank will restrict his access to any accounts connected to your mother's estate and report the irregularities to the proper authorities. The thought of my father facing legal consequences was both distressing and somehow validating. He had always positioned himself as above reproach, the flawless financial mind that the rest of us couldn't hope to comprehend. The exposure of his deception felt like the crumbling of a facade that had dominated my entire life. I don't know if I want him to go to jail, I admitted, conflicted emotions swirling within me, but I need to protect what Mom left me. You don't have to decide everything today, Mrs. Jensen assured me. For now, we've secured your accounts and assets. Your father can't access them regardless of what legal actions follow. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mr. Blackwell entered, his expression grave. Ms. Reynolds, I thought you should know, your father has left the building. After providing a statement that was less than forthcoming, he was informed he would need to return with legal representation. He became agitated and departed despite our recommendation to resolve matters today. A chill ran through me. Do you think he'll come to the apartment, or try to get back into the house? Mr. Blackwell exchanged glances with Mrs. Jensen. It might be prudent to take precautions. Would you like us to arrange for a security escort? The offer was both comforting and alarming. Had my life really transformed so dramatically in a few hours that I now needed protection from my own father? I think I should go to a friend's place tonight, I decided. Give him time to cool down. Mrs. Jensen nodded approvingly. A wise choice. In the meantime, we should complete the proper documentation to ensure your access to all your accounts and assets. The papers your father brought were fraudulent, but we have the legitimate documents prepared based on your mother's instructions. For the next hour, I signed the actual inheritance paperwork, officially accepting my role as beneficiary of my mother's trust and taking legal possession of the property she had left me. Each signature felt like an act of both grief and empowerment, honoring my mother's wishes while claiming my financial independence for the first time. As we finished, Mrs. Jensen handed me a folder containing copies of everything we had reviewed. There's one more thing your mother arranged, she said, in the private viewing room, if you feel up to it. Curious despite my emotional exhaustion, I followed her to a small room equipped with a computer screen and comfortable chairs. Mrs. Jensen inserted a USB drive into the computer and turned to me. Your mother recorded this about a month before she passed. She asked that you view it only after the inheritance matters were settled. I'll give you privacy, but I'll be just outside if you need anything. She left, closing the door softly behind her. After a moment of gathering my courage, I pressed play on the video file that had opened on the screen. My mother's face appeared, thinner than I remembered from her healthy days, but with the same warm eyes and gentle smile. The sight of her, animated and speaking when I had grown accustomed to her absence, brought fresh tears. Amber, my beautiful girl, she began, her voice slightly raspy but strong. If you're watching this, then I'm gone and Sarah has helped you secure your inheritance as we planned. I'm so sorry for the secrecy, sweetheart, and never wanted to come between you and your father. But I needed to protect you. She shifted slightly, adjusting the scarf around her head that covered her chemo-induced hair loss. Your father wasn't always as you've known him. When we first met, he was ambitious but principled. The gambling started small, just poker nights with colleagues. But over the years it grew. I covered for him, made excuses, paid debts from my own accounts to keep our family stable. She paused, looking down briefly before meeting the camera's eye again with renewed determination. That was my mistake. By shielding him from consequences, I enabled the addiction to worsen. By the time I realized how serious it had become, our finances were deeply entangled. Descending them took time and careful planning. My mother leaned closer to the camera, her expression intensifying. Listen carefully, Amber. What I've left you isn't just money and property, it's independence, the freedom I gradually surrendered in my marriage without even realizing it. Your father will try to make you doubt yourself, to convince you that you need his guidance. You don't. You are capable and stronger than you know. She smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed her tired face into the mother I remembered from happier times. I've watched you grow into a thoughtful, compassionate woman with talents and wisdom all your own. Trust yourself, build the life you want. And know that whatever happens with your father, my greatest hope is that someday he finds the help he needs to be the man I once knew. But his recovery cannot come at the expense of your future. She blew a kiss to the camera. I love you, my darling girl, always and forever. The screen went black, and I sat motionless, tears streaming down my face. My mother's final gift hadn't been the money or the house, but this moment of truth and the freedom to chart my own course without the manipulative influences that had shaped her life. When Mrs. Jensen gently knocked and re-entered, I had composed myself enough to stand on steady legs. "Thank you," I said, "for everything you did to help my mother, and for helping me today." "Rebecca was a special person," she replied simply. "Honoring her wishes has been a privilege." As we walked back through the bank, I felt fundamentally changed, grieving and uncertain about what would come next, but also strangely liberated. The note I had hidden and the brave woman who had read it had altered the course of my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. Leaving the bank that afternoon felt like stepping into a different world. The same sun shone overhead, the same city traffic crawled past, but everything had changed. In my purse was a folder containing documentation of my inheritance, copies of my mother's trusts, and new bank cards for accounts I now controlled. I called Madison from the bank steps, finally free to use my own phone again after retrieving it from security, who had found it in my father's briefcase. "Amber, are you okay? I've been worried sick." Madison's voice was thick with concern. "You never answered my texts after that cryptic message about the bank." "It's a long story," I said, my voice wavering between exhaustion and disbelief at all that had transpired. "Can I stay with you tonight? I don't think it's safe to go back to my apartment yet." "Of course, I'll come pick you up. Where are you?" 20 minutes later, Madison pulled up in her weathered Honda. One look at my face told her this was serious, and she asked no questions until we were safely in her apartment with mugs of tea in hand. Then I told her everything: the fraudulent documents, my hidden note, my father's gambling, my mother's secret preparations. "My God, Amber," she whispered when I finished, "I knew your dad was controlling, but this is next level. He was literally trying to steal your inheritance." "I still can't believe it," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I'll wake up tomorrow and none of this will have happened, that Dad will be the person I thought he was my whole life." Madison reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What will you do now?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since leaving the bank. "I need to secure my things from the apartment. Mrs. Jensen thinks I should change the locks on the house since it's legally mine now, and I should probably find a lawyer." The practical steps helped anchor me when everything else felt unsteady. That evening, Madison and I drove to my apartment with her boyfriend Jake as additional security. My father's car wasn't in the lot, but I still felt a flutter of anxiety as I unlocked my door. Inside, the disruption was immediately apparent. Drawers stood open in the living room, papers scattered across the coffee table. My laptop was missing from its usual spot. In the bedroom, clothes had been pulled from hangers, and my jewelry box was open, the few valuable pieces my mother had given me gone. "He's been here," I said unnecessarily, surveying the damage. Madison was already on the phone with the police, reporting the break-in. Jake checked the rest of the apartment to ensure no one was still there. "Your mom's blue box," I suddenly remembered, the one she told me about before she died. "I never found it." We searched the apartment, but if it had ever been there, it was gone now. Whatever additional messages or items my mother had left in that box were now in my father's possession. The police arrived, documented the break-in, and took my statement. They seemed particularly interested when I explained the context: the inheritance dispute, the bank meeting, my father's potential fraud charges. "Financial crimes and domestic disputes can be a volatile combination," the officer warned me. "I'd recommend staying elsewhere until this is resolved, and you might want to consider a restraining order." The suggestion that I might need legal protection from my own father was surreal but impossible to dismiss after seeing what he'd done to my apartment. We gathered essential items: clothes, documents, irreplaceable photos, and I locked the door knowing I likely wouldn't return. That night, lying on Madison's sofa bed, I finally opened my mother's letter. Her handwriting, so familiar and missed, filled the pages with warmth and wisdom. "My dearest Amber," she began, "if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about your father's financial problems. I'm so sorry you had to learn this way, through crisis rather than honest conversation. Your father wasn't always as he is now. Addiction changes people, warps their priorities and perceptions until they can justify actions they once would have found unthinkable." She went on to explain more details about the financial arrangements she had made, but also shared memories of happier times and reflections on her life choices. "I don't regret marrying your father," she wrote. "Our love gave me you, my greatest joy. But I do regret not establishing healthier boundaries when his problems began. I thought I was helping by covering his debts, by maintaining appearances, by not insisting he get help. I realize now that my silence and financial bailouts only enabled the addiction to grow stronger." Her insights into my father's psychology were compassionate but clear-eyed. Richard's relationship with money has always been complicated. For him, financial success became the measure of his worth as a man, as a provider. When gambling losses threatened that identity, he couldn't face the failure. Each attempt to recoup losses only dug the hole deeper. By the time I understood the severity of the problem, his self-deception was complete. He truly believes he's entitled to control all family assets, that his financial expertise justifies any means necessary. The letter ended with practical advice about managing the inheritance and property, along with her hopes for my future. Don't let this experience make you bitter, darling. Your father needs help, not hatred, but you need protection until he gets that help. Set your boundaries firmly, live your life fully, and know that wherever I am so proud of the woman you've become. I fell asleep with the letter clutched to my chest, my mother's words providing both comfort and direction in the chaos my life had become. The next morning brought a flurry of necessary actions. With Mrs. Jensen's help, I arranged for a locksmith to change the locks at my childhood home. I filed for a temporary restraining order based on the apartment break-in. I contacted a lawyer recommended by the bank to help navigate the potential legal proceedings against my father. By afternoon, I stood on the porch of what was now legally my house, the home where I had grown up. The locksmith had just finished installing new locks and handed me the keys. All set, Ms. Reynolds. No one's getting in without these now. I thanked him, paid the invoice, and watched him drive away before turning to face the imposing Tudor-style home. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt different knowing it was mine, not my father's domain where I was merely a guest. Family photos lined the entryway, my mother's touch that my father had never removed. I ran my fingers along the banister she had insisted on preserving during renovations, the wood smooth from decades of hand sliding along its surface. In the kitchen, evidence of my father's hasty departure was everywhere. Unwashed coffee cup in the sink, financial papers scattered across the table, cabinet doors left ajar. I gathered the papers, noting with a chill that several had my forged signature on them. More evidence of how thoroughly he had been prepared to deceive me. Upstairs, I paused outside my parents' bedroom, hesitant to enter what had always been their private space, but it wasn't theirs anymore. My mother was gone, and my father had forfeited his right to this home through his actions. The master bedroom had been ransacked, dresser drawers appended, closet doors flung open. He had clearly been searching for valuables or documents before fleeing. My mother's side of the room was particularly disturbed, as if he had been hunting for hidden assets she might have kept from him. In the midst of this chaos, a detail caught my eye. The air vent cover near her bedside table was slightly askew. Curious, I knelt and removed it completely. Inside, wedged against the Dutch cork, was a small blue box. My hands trembled as I withdrew it. This had to be the box my mother had mentioned in her final weeks, the one she said contained papers I would need. Had my father missed it in his frantic search, or had he never known about this hiding place? The box was locked, but the key was taped to its underside, so like my mother, to hide things in plain sight. Inside were USB drives, handwritten journals, and a stack of financial records dating back years. Each documented withdrawal or unusual transaction on my father's accounts was noted in my mother's precise handwriting, along with dates and suspected purposes. She had been tracking his gambling for over a decade, creating a paper trail of his addiction and the family funds he had squandered. It was a profoundly sad discovery, evidence of my mother's silent struggle to protect our family's finances while watching her husband spiral deeper into addiction. But it was also a gift, providing irrefutable documentation should legal proceedings against my father become necessary. That evening, as I sat in what was now my home office sorting through my mother's records, my phone rang with an unknown number. Amber, my father's voice was ragged, lacking its usual confidence. "We need to talk." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "I have nothing to say to you, Dad. You broke into my apartment, you tried to steal my inheritance, you've been lying to me since Mom died." "You don't understand," he insisted, desperation edging his words. "I was trying to protect you. The money, I was going to pay it all back. I just needed time to turn things around." The familiar justifications washed over me, but they no longer held the power they once had. "I found Mom's records," I said quietly. "All of them. She documented everything, Dad. Every withdrawal, every loan, every lie." Silence stretched between us, and when he spoke again his voice had deflated entirely. "I need help, Amber." It was perhaps the first honest thing he had said to me in years. "Yes, you do, but I can't be the one to give it to you, not now." "What am I supposed to do?" Where am I supposed to go? That house has been my home for 30 years. The plea for sympathy might have worked before, but I now recognized it as another manipulation tactic. You have options, Dad. You can stay with Uncle Robert, you can check into rehab for gambling addiction, you can take responsibility for your actions instead of trying to solve them by stealing from your daughter. I never thought of it as stealing, he said, his voice small. It was family money, I was the head of the family. No, Dad, it was Mom's money, and now it's mine. She made sure of that because she knew you couldn't be trusted with it. Another long silence followed. The police came to Robert's house looking for me. Yes, I filed a report about the break-in at my apartment. Are you pressing charges? There was real fear in his voice now. I had been wrestling with this question since leaving the bank. Part of me wanted justice, wanted him to face consequences for his betrayal, but another part remembered the father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my art shows, who had been consumed by an addiction he couldn't control. That depends on you, I said finally. If you return everything you took from my apartment, if you agree to seek treatment for your gambling, and if you sign legal documents acknowledging my ownership of Mom's assets, then no, I won't press charges for the fraud attempts or the break-in. You're bargaining with me? He sounded genuinely shocked. I'm setting boundaries, I corrected him, something Mom tried to teach me but could never fully practice herself. The choice is yours, Dad. Get help and we might eventually rebuild some kind of relationship. Continue as you have been, and I'll use every legal means necessary to protect myself. After our call ended, I sat in my mother's favorite reading chair, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I had confronted my father's manipulation without backing down. The road ahead would be difficult, but I would face it with my mother's strength and wisdom to guide me. 3 months after that fateful day at the bank, I stood in the freshly painted living room of what was now undeniably my home, surveying the changes I'd made. Gone were my father's dark leather furnishings and imposing bookshelves, replaced with lighter, more colorful pieces that reflected my own taste. My mother's artwork hung prominently on walls now painted in warm, welcoming tones. The transformation of the space mirrored my own internal journey, clearing out the oppressive elements of the past while honoring and preserving what was valuable and true. In the days following our phone conversation, my father had indeed returned my stolen belongings through Uncle Robert, who served as an uncomfortable intermediary. The laptop, jewelry, and even some items I hadn't realized were missing appeared in boxes on my porch. Each item returned represented a small victory, a tangible acknowledgement of boundaries finally respected. More significantly, my father had entered a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. According to Uncle Robert, it was the first time he had admitted the extent of his problem and committed to recovery. The program was intensive, 90 days of therapy, financial counseling, and group support. I sent him a card when he completed his first month, a simple note acknowledging his effort without promising immediate reconciliation. My own healing took different forms. With Mrs. Jensen's recommendation, I began working with a financial advisor named Marcus who specialized in helping clients develop healthy relationships with money. Your situation is more common than you might think, Marcus told me during our first meeting. Adult children who grow up with financially controlling parents often struggle with either extreme caution or impulsive spending. Your mother's foresight has given you resources many don't have. But the psychological aspects need attention too. He was right. Despite inheriting substantial assets, I initially found myself afraid to spend even small amounts, hearing my father's critical voice in my head questioning every purchase. Other times, I felt a rebellious urge to spend lavishly, as if to prove I could make my own decisions. Marcus helped me develop a balanced approach and understand that financial management wasn't the mysterious, complex realm my father had always portrayed it to be. Money is just a tool, Marcus reminded me often. It's not a measure of your worth or a source of power over others. It's a resource to help you live according to your values. Those values led me to one of the most healing decisions I made during this period. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established a small art therapy program for teens at the community center where I taught. My mother had always believed in art's power to help people process difficult emotions, and creating this program in her name felt like the perfect tribute. The program launched with 10 students, each dealing with their own struggles, family problems, anxiety, grief. Watching them find expression and relief through creativity reminded me why I had become an art teacher in the first place. It connected me to my mother's legacy in a way that transcended the financial aspects of her inheritance. I also began reconnecting with family members my father had gradually isolated us from over the years. My mother's sister Catherine, who lived across the country, had stopped visiting after an argument with my father years ago. When I reached out, she responded with immediate warmth and shared stories about my mother I had never heard, their childhood adventures. My mother's early artistic pursuits, the strong-willed young woman she had been before meeting my father. Rebecca was always independent, Catherine told me during her visit. That's what makes it so hard to understand how she ended up in a relationship where that independence was slowly eroded. I think it happened so gradually she didn't notice until it was too deeply established, I reflected, thinking of my mother's letter, and by then she was focused on protecting me instead of herself. As summer turned to fall, I made another significant discovery. While organizing my mother's studio space in the detached garage, I found a collection of journals she had kept throughout her marriage. Unlike the financial records in the blue box, these were personal reflections, her hopes, fears, joys, and struggles chronicled over decades. Reading them was both painful and illuminating. I watched through her words as my young, vibrant mother gradually surrendered pieces of herself to maintain peace in the marriage. The early entries showed her noticing concerning patterns in my father's behavior, but convincing herself they weren't serious. Middle years documented her growing awareness of his gambling, but also her commitment to protecting me from that knowledge. The final journals, written during her illness, revealed her determination to break the cycle. I cannot leave this world knowing Amber might face the same slow erosion of self I experienced, she wrote. Financial independence is just the foundation. My deepest hope is that she builds upon it a life where she never diminishes herself to accommodate someone else's weaknesses. These insights helped me understand both my parents with greater compassion. My father's addiction hadn't developed overnight, nor had my mother's enabling response. They had fallen into destructive patterns incrementally, each small compromise making the next one easier until they were living in a distorted reality they couldn't see clearly from within. In late October, 6 months after my mother's death, I had my first face-to-face meeting with my father since the bank confrontation. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my house and Uncle Robert's, where he was staying while continuing outpatient treatment. He looked older, the confident facade stripped away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. His hands trembled slightly as he stirred his coffee. "The house looks good," he said awkwardly. "I drove by last week. I like what you've done with the garden." I nodded, uncertain how to navigate this new territory where we acknowledged the truth instead of maintaining comfortable fictions. "Mom's roses are doing well this year." We made stilted small talk for several minutes before he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I've been working through the financial amends part of my recovery program," he said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "This is a full accounting of the money I took from you and your mother over the years, and this is my repayment plan." The documents detailed approximately $470, zero diverted from family accounts to cover gambling debts over 15 years, an amount that shocked me despite knowing the problem was substantial. The repayment plan was modest but realistic, acknowledging that full restitution would take many years. "I don't expect forgiveness," my father said quietly. "I've been talking about that in therapy, the difference between making amends and expecting forgiveness. The first is my responsibility, the second is your choice on your timeline." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we had ever had. There was no manipulation, no subtle undermining of my confidence, no positioning himself as the financial authority, just a flawed man acknowledging the harm he had caused. "I'm proud of the work you're doing," I told him, meaning it despite the complicated emotions still swirling between us. "I can't promise what our relationship will look like going forward, but I'm willing to see where this new honesty takes us." As I drove home afterward, I felt my mother's presence particularly strongly. I could almost hear her saying, "Remember, healing isn't linear, darling. There will be steps forward and back. Trust the process and trust yourself." In the months that followed, I continued establishing my own life and identity. I learned to manage the inheritance responsibly, finding a balance between security and generosity. The art therapy program expanded to 2 locations, helping more teens find healing through creative expression. My father and I maintained cautious contact, rebuilding trust in small increments through continued honesty. One evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in colors my mother would have loved to capture on canvas, I reflected on all that had happened since that day at the bank when I slipped a desperate note to a stranger. My mother's greatest gift hadn't been the financial inheritance, substantial though it was. It had been her foresight and courage in breaking patterns she recognized as harmful. Through her careful planning and final messages, she had given me the opportunity to learn earlier than she had that independence, financial and otherwise, was not selfish but essential. I thought of Sarah Jensen, whose professionalism and compassion had quite literally changed the course of my life, of Marcus, who had helped me develop a healthier relationship with money than either of my parents had managed, of the teens in my art therapy program, learning to express difficult truths through creativity. The inheritance my mother left wasn't just in bank accounts and property deeds, it was in the wisdom she had gained through hard experience, it was in her journals and letters, her art and her love, it was in her final act of protection, ensuring I would have the resources to build a life free from the financial control that had constrained her own choices. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the evening sky, I made a silent promise to honor that inheritance in the truest sense, not just by managing the money wisely, but by living with the courage and integrity my mother had discovered too late in her own life. By establishing healthy boundaries in all my relationships, by using my resources to help others find their voice and power. I would build upon the foundation she had laid, creating a legacy that measured wealth not in dollars but in freedom, authenticity, and compassion. That I knew would be the outcome that would make her proudest. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? How did you navigate that difficult revelation? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and discovery. Remember, sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful challenges.